Welcome to Heal Through Humor, the podcast designed for you to learn about yourself and laugh along the way. In each episode, we'll explore the healing power of humor as I sit down with guests to talk about mental health, relationships, self-growth, and the ever-evolving world of social media. I'm your host, Talia Bombola. Let's get started. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and anyone tuning in to Heal Through Humor. Today we have a very special guest who I, off-air was joking, have been following for a while, in the not creepy sense, just in the social media sense. Her name is Thais, and she and I align.
Stalking, you mean?
Yeah, right. Stalking you slowly. She and I align on the psychoanalytic view and probably more psychodynamic view as well. So I'm greatly looking forward to today's discussion, the free flow, to see where it goes. So if you want to take it away and introduce yourself and tell people how you got started and what interests you most about psychoanalytic work.
So yes, well, I am a psychoanalytic psychotherapist here in Los Angeles, and I started back in 2010 with doing a yoga teacher training. At the time, I was grappling with an eating disorder and body dysmorphia challenges, and was trying to find any way to heal or to kind of find a different relationship with myself and my body. And so I started going to yoga, fell in love, did yoga teacher training, really, really loved that. And then that took me on a journey of becoming a nutrition coach, which then took me into becoming a life coach. And through that whole experience, I've been just really on the exploration of like, how do we tend to the things that hurt inside of us, and how do we change the things that hurt and wound and dictate our shadows? How do we find a way through that so that we can feel more whole or more free or more, I know these are cliche terms, but that's been really my exploration. Like, how do we find more wholeness? And so in 2018, I went back to school, got my master's, all in kind of this earnest desire to increase my capacity for the work that I was doing with my clients. And then I shifted into psychotherapy, and I had a professor my very first quarter who was very hot. Okay. He had tattoos and a t-shirt. Like, he was just like the coolest, hottest guy. And he was so intensely passionate about this idea of psychoanalytic psychotherapy. And at the time, I've never heard, I didn't know what that was. I honestly thought, going into getting my master's, that all of psychotherapy was psychoanalytic without the name psychoanalytic. Like, I thought all of therapy was about diving into a deeper understanding of who we are. So I went into my master's program very naive, Talia, like completely unaware that actually the mental health field is predominantly geared around behavior modification and diagnosis and a whole different kind of experience of how to relate to humans that I was not aware of. So I thought all of therapy is psychoanalytic psychotherapy, and this guy was so passionate about it. And I'm like, oh, I think maybe I have to I have to recalibrate what I know of the field, and because of his passion, I started to become more interested in it. When it started analysis 1 year into my grad school. Anyway, and long story short, now I'm here and I continue to be really interested in not only how to do the work with the people in front of me, but also how to continue to spread this awareness that the field of mental health consists of more than just CBT, that consists of more than just changing your mind about things, but actually can also be about expanding what we know of ourselves in the interest of becoming more whole.
What would you say was the biggest adjustment after the awakening that realizing not all therapy is like analytic therapy?
When I was a life coach, like when I didn't know much about mental health and all I knew was the coaching industry, okay, I deeply believed that our thoughts and feelings, our feelings happen before our thoughts. And I was then continually struck by the self-help books that told us that actually our thoughts come before our feelings, and it's our thoughts that drive our feelings. And if we change our thoughts, we change our feelings. And that just didn't align with what I knew and what I was reading about how actually when our brain takes in information, it actually goes to our feeling center first, and then it processes the information through the filter of our feelings, moving into our logic mind. So that paradigm alone, that kind of difference in understanding, set me apart, or set many. I'm not the only one, but it set many coaches apart from each other in the coaching industry. I just thought that it's a marketing trick. Like it's a way that coaches try to sell that they have more capacity or more power over their clients if they're telling them it's only a mindset issue and you just need to fix your mindset and then you'll fix your life. So then I went into my grad school experience thinking, well, like psychotherapy knows that, right? Like psychotherapy is a field, psychology is a field grounded in science. So of course it's going to support this idea that feelings are actually more predominantly important in attending to than our thoughts. And so to then go into grad school and learn that the field is also divided around this idea. And not only is it divided, but the predominant voice is the voice of this evidence-based, gold standard, science-backed perspective that we have to control our thoughts to control our lives. I couldn't understand. So then it felt like a soothing balm to find that actually that not everyone thinks that way. Thank goodness. There's communities of people who don't agree with that.
It's mind-blowing.
Yes, it's truly remarkable, actually. Even just the idea of like the board, that I have to subscribe by, like the legal board of California that protects consumers in the field of in the field of marriage and family therapists, is called the Board of Behavioral Sciences. Even that alone speaks to the fact that it is very kind of pervasive in the field of psychotherapy that we're here to change behavior. We're here to focus on symptom management, and behavior modification to get people to be better to be better robots for our capitalist system. Like, I don't know. I obviously it's much more complicated than that, but yeah, it's been a really interesting journey of learning what the field of mental health is really about, and not at all what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think the majority of people I've talked to who had being a therapist or working in mental health more as a second career or like parallel career to another career where they were still working with people, that sometimes if we weren't in our own therapy ourselves beforehand, like we didn't have the experience as the client, or we were only told certain aspects of the mental health field before we got into it, that can be a very abrupt adjustment, because it's like, wait, like we got to see curtain almost. Yeah. It's like, wait, that's not what I thought this really was. Or I know when I saw my therapist for the first time, like the first time I ever had therapy, I was like 13. And I had no clue what my therapist had gone through to get to being a psychodynamic therapist. And then years had passed. I told her I wanted to be a therapist, and she explained all the steps. And I was like, you had to do all of that? Like 3,000 hours? That's a lot. Like there's a lot more that goes into it, that, like you're saying, it is a good idea to have something protect consumers for the governing board. But a lot of the times those tests are arbitrary. They do not dictate how well you are doing as a clinician or the skill that you have. And we are so behaviorally based because a lot of the times, especially now, mental health and insurance are trying to be like BFFs, but it's not really going that well, especially for people like us who practice more of like the analytic dynamic lens. I can't stand insurance in the sense that it limits the session. It decides what treatment is appropriate or not. Oh, you should be over this by now, essentially is what they're saying when they're like, finish it in 12 sessions. It's like, that goes so against long-term therapy, which I think is the gold standard for some. And for others, it's brief short-term therapy. Like intensive brief psychodynamic therapy. That could be a great modality for some people. Not everybody needs long-term analysis. I just happen to love working with my clients for many years. It's so fascinating to watch them grow and change along those years.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's even confusing, even just this idea of telling consumers that should they be suffering with something going on in their minds, they should go to psychotherapy, because psychotherapy is not a monolith. And our orientation and our way of working really is different from one therapist to another, and that can be really confusing for consumers who then go to therapy thinking what they're getting is kind of this broad brushstrokes psychotherapy. They get something that doesn't work for them, and so then they think therapy doesn't work for me. And I'm not saying that consumers maybe should know that there are different modalities. I personally find that the more information I have, the more educated I can make my decisions. And so I'm of the mind that it's helpful for consumers to know that there actually is a
True.
lot of different types of psychotherapy, and there's different ways of working. And so that they can then say, oh, you know what? It's not that therapy as a whole didn't work for me. It's that maybe I don't like this modality. I didn't like this approach, and like, I think that that can be really tricky though, when even this idea of different modalities view what change is in very drastic ways. And so one of the ways that has been really helpful for me is to think, even though it's called psychotherapy, I wish in my kind of perfect universe, I wish that we could differentiate between coaching or more skills-based work, which is like the DBT or the
Right.
mindfulness, even CBT, like skills based therapy. And I would call that coaching. And I'm not saying that it's the same thing as what coaches do, but I think that helps us understand more of what we're getting. If we're
Hmm.
going into a coaching session and we're doing DBT, we can expect to get homework, right? We can expect that the therapist is going to be more directive. We can expect that it's going to be focused more on like, okay, when you have an anxiety moment, a panic attack, for example, what are the 5 things you're going to do,
Right.
right? That's skills based. That's coaching. That's in that world. And then in the other world, in my fantasy, is psychotherapy or developmental psychotherapy. And that type of psychotherapy, more of what you and I practice,
Hmm.
right, is not necessarily better. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. It's just different. It's so different that we can't even compare. In developmental psychotherapy, we're looking at and listening for um, what was, in some ways, kind of what we didn't get as children, what was missing in our development that we now need to attend to in order for our minds to feel more whole, to feel more spacious. So if we're looking at anxiety for example, you may go to a skills based coach and you're going to learn what anxiety is. You're going to learn what the symptoms are. You're going to learn how to treat those symptoms. And that can provide tremendous relief and it can be very useful. So you go there. But then you may find yourself getting curious. Like, why do I get anxiety? My life is going perfectly well. Why am I continually feeling anxious? I'm doing these things and they help me to a certain extent, but I'm now curious to know what else is going on for me. And so that person may come to you or to me or to other psychoanalytic, psychodynamic depth practitioners. And what we do, right, is we see anxiety as a piece of information, but it doesn't really tell us much at all about what's actually going on for the person. It's a symptom, just like a fever is a symptom. It's not the end all be all. There's
Right.
way more going on that once we understand, once we can see, oh, you're experiencing anxiety because of what has happened in the past that is now currently playing out in the present and in the future. Oh, look, you're understanding that everyone is attacking you, that everyone wants to,
For something.
that there's like a persecutory sense, or there's a sense that everyone is out to get you. No wonder you feel anxiety. So let's understand, like, why may you be experiencing that? Oh, when you were a child, like you never really experienced someone's mind as being helpful, et cetera, et cetera. That then is the modality that you're probably going to want if you want to develop a different relationship with your anxiety, to see it as information, to befriend your anxiety, and potentially develop different capacities inside so that the anxiety is no longer so prevalent or even existing in your life. If we could see that the field, Talia, in those two schools, I would be so much happier. And I think consumers would then feel so much more supported in getting the help that they want and they need. But of course, like you said, psychopharm, pharma, gosh, why is the word slipping in my mind?
She'll come to you.
Like big pharma, as well as health insurance, they really prefer short-term behavior-based treatments because it's easier to control.
Yeah, and I would say there's a time and a place. I like how you differentiated like the skills-based coaching from more of the insight-oriented long-term therapy. We could provide both. We don't have to see a coach and a therapist separately. Like their skills coaching can be part of therapy. Mm-hmm. There's a key piece, I think, of insight, and that I believe insight, I think you do as well, that's the catalyst for change. So it's not just I have anxiety. When we can temper that and you can function on a daily basis, then we can go deeper. Why is the anxiety present? What is it trying to tell you? How long has it been in your life? How long has your relationship with anxiety been? I word things very similarly to how you did, because I want the client, if I my dream world, I would like the client to not see what they're journeying through as something wrong with them or something that needs to be fixed or that they're at fault for. It really is about having insight into, well, what makes that kind of relationship attractive for you? You said you had a bad picker. What is it about people who don't really love you or can't really choose you that you find so attractive? Does this remind you of anyone from your childhood? Template for you in some way? And really being insightful and oriented towards insight in the sessions can also help the skills-based coaching be targeted to the right areas, rather than it's just like, oh, you have crippling anxiety. Go walk me through the 5 things you can see, 4 things you can like, that's great, but that's almost more like crisis management when we think about it analytically than it is anything else. And one of my analytic teachers training said the behavioral techniques are sometimes great in isolation. However, they really miss the mark because they're not going to the deep underneath reason of why it's even there in the first place. Like, why is the need for a skill to regulate a behavior even there in the first place? And when we can target that, people might find themselves not needing as much skill-based or behavioral-based therapy. So I love that we're having this discussion, because I think it needs to be said more, not dismissing behavioral therapy techniques. I still use them to my own today. They're very helpful, but that was not nearly as helpful as psychoanalytic therapy to make those deep connections to like, oh, that's from when I was 2 years old. Okay, like we'll go there instead. It's not really about the behavioral skill at that point. What would you say is the most common topic that your clients come in wanting to talk about?
Oh, goodness. Oh, my goodness. That's a really, well, a lot of my work has centered around this idea of the worthiness wound. It's a kind of phenomenon that I have coined in an attempt to name and explore why is it that we may feel like everything is good in our lives, we're getting what we want, we're successful in our careers, et cetera, and yet there's still this debilitating sense that there's something really wrong with us. There's something missing. There's a piece of our soul, a piece of ourselves that feel really inadequate, and pervasively so. And so partly why I wanted to go back to school and get my master's is because I wanted more doors to open for me to continue to explore this concept and this idea that I kind of in some ways made up based on my coaching work. But I wanted to see if it actually had any teeth in the world of psychology. And it's been really fun to continue to explore. And while I think in some ways my my practice has expanded beyond worthiness, I see folks from all different backgrounds. I see folks that are coming in for all different reasons, eating disorders, trauma, etc. The worthiness one has continued to be a really exciting place of curiosity for me, because because it kind of defies logic in some way. And I think that's why people then come to me. They're like, it doesn't make sense. Like there's a sense of like, why, how is it that I can tell myself, I can look in the mirror, I can do all the self-help book exercises, right. I can do all of the logical things that everyone's telling me to do, like believe in yourself and affirmations and
Right.
tell yourself something different. And yet there's this pervasive sense that there's something wrong. And that's what I like about it, because it goes perfectly in hand with developmental psych, which is we can't just rationalize and logical mind our way into a wound that is built on something way beyond the rational mind, right? Like a wound that goes closer to the core of who we are. And so it's a lot of my clients come to me wanting to understand and to experience something different in themselves around the worthiness wound. And it's really cool, because in a way, what happens when we feel inadequate and unworthy is that we're missing internally for us is a sense of goodness that often comes with a consistent good other. So if we have a consistent good other that we can then internalize, then we develop a sense of our own goodness. But if we're lacking that in some way, then we kind of carry a pervasive sense that there's something bad within us, there's something wrong, inadequate within us. And so in developmental psych or psychoanalytic psychotherapy, I like meeting with my patients more than once a week, preferably twice a week or more. What we're doing there is we're kind of consistently creating an environment where with reliability and with consistency, they can start to internalize that maybe there are good others, and then as a result, maybe they are also good.
And now, time for an ad break. Hey there, listeners. We're interrupting your favorite podcast to bring you a special message from our friends over at Therapy Swag. Are you tired of the same old boring wardrobe? Ready to add a dash of sass and style into your closet while repping mental health? Look no further than Therapy Swag, your go-to online store for snarky shirts and mugs. Their products make awesome gifts for friends, family, or anyone in need of a little pick-me-up. They are on a mission to break the stigma surrounding mental health. They use humor and creativity to open up dialogue, challenge stereotypes, and remind us it's okay to not be okay. Because let's face it, laughter is the best medicine. So why settle for ordinary when you can stand out with Therapy Swag? Head over to their website today and treat yourself to some snarky goodness. Trust us, your wardrobe and your mood will thank you. Thanks to our sponsor for supporting the show. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. As I always joke that going to, well, at least long term, but like going to therapy with someone you have trust and rapport with is almost like microdosing a secure attachment or like an internalized object that we many people, you said it so eloquently, many people are striving and seeking likely their whole lives, if they didn't have it in childhood, or even if they did, they want to have it again, that good object, that good other to have that relationship with. And the therapist can serve as that. And with all the transferences and countertransferences that come up in the therapeutic relationship, it really is so healing in a way that the client can take the lessons into their everyday life and start to utilize that and the others as good objects or good people to be around, if we're using layman's terms. And then they can start to change beliefs. Oh, I am worthy of a good relationship, because I get the clients who come in, I focus on confidence and assertiveness. So it's 100% self-worth based in my view, like maybe 95% self-worth, 5% miscellaneous, all round up. But their struggle is they know conscious mind so much. They know the books, they know the trainings, they are avid podcast listeners. That doesn't separate, or that doesn't necessarily permeate the subconscious, where there's that blueprint of this is all you're good for, this is what you're destined for, relationships will look like this, they won't look like this, the job that you'll only ever have is that. There's limits for the subconscious. And if we're only focusing on the conscious mind, the conscious is going to be having its way with us. And that's where a lot of clients come in, and there's that disconnect of like, why did I do this if I know this? And that's where having them as much as we can, like meeting of the mind.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back in and get insight. Let's try to tap into your subconscious and gain insight as to why. If you
Yeah.
believe this, you did this. Or if you don't believe this, you did this. And that really helps clients to, my goal eventually,
Yeah.
if it's not long-term
Yeah.
analysis, is to become like obsolete in the client's life, but kind of like the Jiminy Cricket voice on their shoulder that they can reference our sessions. So I think there's definitely something to be said
Yeah.
for having
Yeah.
the awareness and the insight be the guide. And I have clients who will take breaks. I've taken breaks in my own analysis because there's just sometimes where it's like we go too deep a little too quickly and they need to kind of come back up to the surface, like they're scuba diving. Because I view kind of the psyche as like, we can go as deep as the iceberg that sunk the Titanic, or we can go like play in the shallow end. And we have to be comfortable going to all levels of that when we're working with the client long term, because insight can take time, and sitting with how much our life has been shaped around these beliefs we may not have even been aware of, it can be pretty jarring for a client when they first come to realize the disparities of their beliefs and their behaviors.
Yeah, well, and it's a core tenet of psychoanalytic psychotherapy, right? This idea that we don't know ourselves and that we can't fully know ourselves in some ways because our mind is divided upon itself. And in many ways, that division is protective. And in many ways, it's kind of a function of a brain that is trying to discern what data to interpret, given how much data we have access to on a daily basis. I'm not even talking about the internet. I'm talking about simply through the function of living our lives. There's so much that's going on, and our brain has to filter some of it. And the things that we don't know about ourselves are ultimately what can harm us and what gets in our way. We call it self-sabotage, or kind of we call it like what you said, like there's ways in which we know, and then we're finding ourselves not doing it. And so yeah, that's a really important tenet of psychoanalytic psychotherapy, which is, okay, like if there are parts of ourselves that are very hard for us to access, what we call the unconscious, but it's hard to access not because we can't, but because getting into touch with some of these things can be really difficult and really painful. And it forces us to kind of grapple with some of the most difficult parts of ourselves, like our masochism, our sadism, our self-loathing. I mean, it can be really hard to get in touch with certain emotional experiences. But as we expand what we become capable of getting in touch with, like you said, through that scuba diving, through kind of dipping in, dipping out, and finding a sense of kind of we're not helpless to the unconscious. We actually have a tremendous amount of say in how much we can know of ourselves. But as we expand what we know of ourselves, we become less afraid. We become less reactive. We become more interested and more curious about people instead of constantly feeling like we're under attack or defended against, right? Kind of defenses is also a really core part of psychoanalytic psychotherapy, right? Which is that we all have ways that we defend against pain,
Yes.
against hurt, against abandonment. And so we construct these ideas of how life should be so that we don't have to experience an overwhelming amount of pain at any given moment. So there's something really important about defenses, but sometimes they become very inflexible. We find ourselves defending against things that aren't needing to be defended against. And so when we do this work, we're also attempting not to let go of defenses, but to be able to develop some flexibility around which defenses we employ and how we navigate and relate to our defenses, right? So and then another thing that you mentioned, another core tenet of psychoanalytic psychotherapy, is that how we relate to others is inevitably going to come up in how we relate to our therapist. It's this idea of like, well, we bring ourselves everywhere, that our blueprint, our way of understanding ourselves and the world is inevitably going to show up in how we relate to ourselves and our therapist in the psychotherapy encounter. And as psychoanalytic psychotherapists, we're trained to listen to that. That's a different type of listening, right? It's not just about what's coming out of the client's mouth, but also we're attempting to listen to how they're understanding us, how they're relating to us, how they're thinking about us as so a source of information for how they may be relating to the world. And when we use that information and when we get curious about that information, we offer an experiential place where we can start to interrogate some assumptions and start to investigate some beliefs here and now. And I think that's one of the coolest parts about this work. And it pisses me off, Talia, when I hear stuff like psychoanalytics, psychotherapy is all about the past, right? Or like coaching or CBT, it's about the future. And psychoanalysis, it's all about the past. And like, of course, we're curious about the past. That's how we are who we are because of our past. However, a psychoanalytic psychotherapist, they're in some ways more interested in what's happening in the here and now, what's alive between two people meeting together. That tells us so much about the patient's history, more than words can in some ways. And when we work on what's happening in the here and now, change starts happening for our future. There's something really beautiful about that. And it takes a lot of training. It's a very, very delicate and difficult way of working. It can be very intimidating for some therapists, who would prefer the kind of more manual-based therapy because it feels more containing that way, to kind of be told how to do therapy,
Right.
that kind of manualized treatment. This is much scarier because
what to do and how.
Yes, because in order to work in the here and now, we have to become open to being the bad guy, messing up, being humble, being willing to get it wrong, being willing to really listen. In so much of what we are is unknown. Bion says that if we're not being in the unknown, why are we bothering to find out what everybody else knows? Like, why we are in the work of figuring out what no one else knows of our own selves. So it's a really profound and exciting and
True.
difficult and beautiful work that can provide really, really life-changing healing for people.
One of the most worthwhile journeys, and I know that word is so overutilized in marketing, but I'm really thinking of it like the light, the shadow, the hero's journey. Like, it really is a journey to the center of yourself when you go under psychodynamic or psychoanalytic therapy, and it's by choice. I think that's the best, when people come in before the metaphorical lights and sirens have gone off in their life, and they're kind of looking around, and they're starting to, that insight's kind of knocking at the door to their conscious, and they're like, this has got to change. Something is happening in your life, whether it be a relationship pattern, a job pattern, some sort of pattern that you find is not working for you, or the pattern of, I want to be my authentic self. I'm more comfortable with that, but I'm finding that areas of my life are not welcoming to my authentic self. The perfect place to go on that journey is with a trained therapist who can help you, I think, in more of a depth-based way. I like to joke that manual therapies are like the alphabet therapies, like DBT, CBT, like any of the alphabet soup therapies. They have their time and place, but for the clients who really want to work on figuring out, why am I the way that I am? What is it about this pattern that I just can't seem to kick it? I used to be this, but now I'm this. They're kind of I call it like the hermit crab journey, where they're like this crab and they know they have to outgrow their shell, but they're so deathly afraid of that almost lethal crawl into the next shell that has all this space, that like we kind of guide and shield them as they find that bigger shell, and they get inside, they're like, oh, okay, we can do this. We can do this. And that like can kind of be our office, is that place for them to explore and to dive more deeply, not have to feel as much. We can't rescue them for their feelings. That's not our job. But the goal is that they don't feel as much shame or as much guilt, maybe, as they do in their outside life when they're trying to go on this journey without somebody who helps them ask the right questions. I honestly think that's the of analysis, is knowing when to ask, because sometimes silence is the best intervention. And if we do break that silence, knowing what to ask and have it be about the client going inward within themselves and journeying into their own past, not necessarily just asking, well, if you get anxious at this up on Friday, how are you going to handle it? That's really not what I'm interested in. We could do some practical workshopping at the end of the sessions, but the most the most lucrative and enriching experience for a client is to be able to have a safe place for themselves to go inwards, to find the answers that they
Yeah.
have, and then to be able to share it with a trusted source and have that aha moment. That's why I
Yeah.
am the way I
Yeah.
am. That explains so much, and that can alleviate so much symptomatology of a lot of disorders and diseases, is having the why.
Yeah.
And that's my favorite part, is like being like a psychological detective is what I like to call
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there's something really also profound
it.
about
It's great
even
work.
just having a space to talk about our thoughts and feelings. And that sounds so simple, but I find in my own therapy that it is the times when I'm just allowed to just exist, to just think, to then just talk out loud about my thoughts, that something gets kind of relieved for me. I mean, it's really remarkable how something as simple as talking can actually be so incredibly profound. And we see this all the time. You're talking to a friend about a breakup, right? And you think you've gotten over it. You're totally fine. Like, everything's fine. It's been months. You're fine. And then as you're talking to your friend, you find yourself getting emotional, right? You find yourself, you find yourself crying and getting sad. And it's like, what's happening there? Well, what's happening there is when we talk, we experience affect. When we talk, when we bring it out of our minds, something starts to open up and to change and to shift for us. And so in that moment, as you talked, you then allowed yourself to get in touch with some feelings about the breakup. That is profound. That is how in many ways healing takes place, right? And we think, oh, but I'm thinking about the breakup and I'm sad as I'm thinking about it, and that can be useful. But there's something about getting those thoughts out and talking about it to an other person who is listening to you that can offer something really profound and really potent. And one thing that I struggle with in terms of like the skills based work, one of the things that I obviously believe that there's merit, there's a time and a place, and I'm not going to judge like what works for people. You know what I mean? If something works for you, that's incredible, that's amazing. I trust people's journey.
Yeah.
Whatever works. There's a place and time for everything. I truly believe that. But what I struggle about it is that when we're looking at the type of the argument against psychoanalytic or long-term work is that people can't afford it, and it's not practical. To me, that feels like, why is it that people who are in a lower socioeconomic class have to get a poorer form of psychotherapy? As you know what I mean, there's like an infantilization of it,
Right.
that like just because you are poor, that you have to get some, you then only get access to short-term interventions and a therapist telling you what to think and how to behave. Like, there's something so unjust about that. I believe that everyone deserves access to long-term treatment, and it really sucks that insurance is so stingy and so just wants to. I can get very angry about it, but uh, there's something that feels quite infantilizing about someone who is in crisis, someone who is really struggling, to then be told, oh, you just have to take some deep breaths, oh, you just have to manage your anxiety. It and then for them to believe that that is what psychotherapy is. I think that's really unfortunate and unfair.
I agree. I would say if we could have access to psychoanalysis for all that want it, that would be a huge progressive step in, I think, a more insightful society direction. And it shouldn't be a barrier. There shouldn't be a barrier to treatment or a selection bias that if you're in this socioeconomic status, you can only have, like you're saying, the short-term brief.
Yeah.
Like, we'll give you something, but we all know that if you take a little bit, it's like antibiotics.
Yeah.
Well, I felt better after 3 days, so I stopped taking it. The infection's going to come back even worse, most likely, the second time. Everyone should have access to whatever modality feels like the best fit
Yes.
for them at the time, based on their own insight or what have
Yes.
you. So I think to be able to have this ability to provide that would be a huge step in our, like, separate from all the insurance stuff. If we could have more training institutes and more people want to do their practicums or their internships at analytic sites, that could be a kind of a stopgap measure of you're still learning, they're still learning, you get the practice. It may not be as high of a pay, but there's like a collaborative model as well. I think that would be a huge progressive step. Absolutely. I would like to see happen in our society. Is there anything that you have to, like a newsletter or a class that you want to offer? I wanted to make sure we had time before we wrapped up that you could talk.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, I don't have a class right now, but you're more than welcome to join my newsletter. You can go to thaissky.com and join the newsletter. I send out an email maybe once a year. It would be nice if it was once a month. But I do send out an email every now and again. I also have, of course, my own podcast where I share more of my thoughts of all sorts of things. And then, of course, Instagram is a great place to connect with me. That's where we got connected. Awesome. I really love Instagram. You can find me there at I am Thais Sky. And yeah, I mean, this has been a really great opportunity to hopefully for people to get a sense that there's so many different ways that we get to know ourselves. And if one way doesn't work, there's others, like the world is so full of curious people wanting to explore more deeply how to navigate the human experience. And I deeply believe that if one thing doesn't work for you, it doesn't mean that you're too much or you're too broken, or it just means maybe you haven't yet found the right thing for you. And that can be kind of unfair, I guess, in a way that like the first thing didn't land, but it can also be a really kind of wonderful experience to be in the search for something that will work for you. Like, what a great way to advocate for yourself in that way. So I really hope that people can find what works for them and trust their process in that.
Yes, I could not agree more. And I want to say thank you for your time. I will also be messaging on Instagram because I had a feeling I would get along with you, and I was accurate in my feeling. So I will touch base with you after we wrap up off air, and then our listeners will tune in and go give her a follow. She is phenomenal. If you want more insight and self-worth based content on your feed, definitely follow Thais.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Heal Through Humor. If you like the show, can you please go on your favorite platform and like, rate, review, subscribe, all of the terms that we usually throw out. I would really appreciate it, and I would love to get more listeners just like you in front of the podcast. And if you have an idea for a guest, please feel free to DM me at Talia Bombola. I would love to hear from you. Until then, I will see you on the next episode. Take care.